Welcome to our program. Today we're going to talk about acceptance of our body shapes.
Too much emphasis has been placed these days on the external packaging, you know, what's on the outside instead of what's inside.
Many women, and now men, are unhappy with their bodies because they don't match up to some idealised, maybe even non-existent, body shape.
But look at us all, we're so different and it'd be boring if we weren't.
So why are we so critical of ourselves and unable to accept our body shapes for what they are?
Why do we seek out plastic surgery or go on fad diets to enhance them? I mean, there's got to be a better way.
So today we're going to take a closer look at body image and talk to some experts in this field.
To kick it off, Jonathan Duffy caught up with Jane Ogden and talked about the idealised body image.
People from all different cultures of all different ages all have different body shapes, and yet increasingly we're being led to believe that there is one body shape which is the ideal, or the way that we should all aspire to look. And I think probably up until about 15 years ago, this was very much the domain of women, and women felt that they had to look a particular way, and young girls beginning to believe that they also should look a particular way, and so they try and become thinner than they actually are. Probably over the last 15 years, there's been an increasing number of men who've also felt that they are dissatisfied with the way that they look, and they wish also that they could change their body shape. Now, in the main, this is probably because of what we believe is attractive, and various sources like the media, television, magazines are telling us that this particular way of looking is the most attractive and the way that we should all aspire to look. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that. It's also to do with all the other meanings that are associated with particular body size. And for example, if you take somebody who's overweight, when you look at that person who's overweight, you can glean a whole load of meanings about that person just from simply looking at them, from that two-dimensional image of what they look like. And people assume that because you're overweight, you're lazy, you're stupid, you're lethargic, you don't do very much from your life, you're not very aspiring. But also they tend to assume that you're out of control. So people assume that because you're larger than someone else, you're out of control of your food intake, of the way that you eat, but also possibly that you're also out of control of other areas of your life. But in contrast, the body image that we're being sold, for women, this is the thin body image, the beautiful thin picture that we see in all our magazines and all our films, then that thinness means attractive, but it also means that you're in control of your life, that you're successful, that you're aspiring, and that you can control the way that you eat, you can control the kind of exercise that you do. And it sort of sells to the world, I am thin, therefore I am a together person, someone who is sorted, someone who is stable. And I think for men, the same is becoming increasingly true. So the ideal image for a man is somebody who is quite well built, someone who is tall, and that also tells the world I'm a controlled person, I'm someone who is in control of the way that I behave.
So Jane, does this lead to better health practice or poorer health practice?
Well, ideally it would lead to some positive health practices because people would aspire to be healthier by being thinner, and therefore they would eat more healthily. But most of the evidence suggests that this isn't the case. When people are dissatisfied with the way that they look, rather than eating more healthily or doing more exercise, what they tend to do is they try to eat more healthily or they try to eat less, but actually they don't succeed in doing that. And what they do is they wake up every morning and they say, today I will set limits on the kinds of foods that I eat or the amount of foods that I eat. But rather than actually doing that or fulfilling those aims, what they then do throughout the day is fantasize or become preoccupied with all the foods that they're trying to avoid. And so eventually that can lead to them overeating, eating more than they would have done even if they hadn't been trying to eat less in the first place. And it can also lead to them not doing the exercise that they'd planned to do. Because by telling yourself, I will deny something, that very thing that you try to deny becomes the absolute object of all your thoughts and the thing that you very much want to do. So it can lead to people becoming more unhealthy. And we know this in terms of overeating, in terms of binge eating, in terms of what we call yo-yo dieting, with people's weight going up and down, and also in terms of more extremes like eating disorders with anorexia and bulimia, often being a consequence of dieting behaviour.
What about the person who exercises regularly, eats properly, but still can't lose weight? How does that affect their self-image or society's image of them?
I think people who are overweight will often criticise the way that they look. And what they do is they take a kind of piecemeal approach to their bodies. And rather than taking an overall view and saying, yes, this is me, overall I'm fine, they kind of break themselves up into small components and they look at their arms or their legs or their thighs or their bottoms and they become very critical of it. And I think people who have tried or people that they fail can end up having quite low self-esteem because they feel that they can't succeed in achieving this perfect image.
You know, a lot of people, in fact, I know I've done this, would have judged somebody just on the way that they looked.
But these stereotypes can often be the opposite of the truth. What your body looks like is not necessarily a reflection of how healthy you are.
That's right. Let's listen to Stephen Blair. He's a health and lifestyle expert.
Yeah, well, I've run nearly every day for 35 years. I was short, fat, and bald when I started. I'm still short, fat, and bald. I suspect another 35 years of running, I'll still be short, fat, and bald. But I am fit. There are plenty of fat people who are quite healthy. They have normal blood pressure, normal cholesterol, they don't have diabetes, they don't smoke cigarettes, they eat a healthful diet, they love their mother, they're a good patriot, they pay their taxes. You can't tell by looking at someone. In fact, if I think about it, I can conjure up a few thin people who are untrustworthy, lazy, outright criminals, have health problems, sedentary, smoke cigarettes. You can't tell by looking at someone. What's important is to practice the healthful behaviors. Eat a healthful diet, be physically active every day, and love your mother, love your children, work hard at your job, be a success, be a patriot.
Too much emphasis is placed on body shape and not enough on healthy behaviours. The message is you can't judge a book by its cover. Someone's body shape, size or weight doesn't tell you anything about their personality or their level of health. There are plenty of thin people with an inappropriate balance of muscle and body fat, and plenty of larger, shelled people who exercise regularly. It's what's between the covers that makes the difference.
It's worth bearing in mind that what we consider to be the perfect body shape actually varies across a lot of different cultures.
Sadly for us, however, in Western societies, the saying goes you can never be too rich or too thin.
A recent study of teenage girls said that 60% of them thought they'd be happier if they were thinner.
Don't think this applies only to women. In another recent survey, 43% of men said they were either extremely or somewhat dissatisfied with their bodies.
But where does this perfect body shape image come from?
Here's what dietitian Jenny O'Day had to say about the influence of the advertising and media industries.
Jenny, how has the media impacted upon our body images?
Look, I think the media's had a huge impact since, say, the 1940s, really. I mean, historically, if you look at the body image of women, for example, and we'll talk about men later, but if you look at the body image of women, it really started to change after World War II. And the body image changed quite dramatically, so that in the 1950s, we saw a return from women wearing say, factory clothes and trousers to women wearing feminine-shaped frocks with waists, displaying, you know, cleavage and waists and a womanly shape that was designed for producing children and looking after families in a very traditional female role. And so that figure, the body image, the perfect body of the 1950s was very much Marilyn Monroe. You know, curvaceous, feminine, female. And what happened in the 1960s, insofar as social change, was that women started to come out of the home more. They were working more in the workplace and participating more in society and demanding more equality. And fashion, of course, had to change for that specific purpose. So we saw the fashion icons such as Twiggy become very, very different, very, very underweight. Twiggy was clinically underweight, and to achieve that look, you had to starve yourself or you had to smoke instead of eat, and that caused a number of problems with body image that have lasted until today. That sort of slim ideal has never really gone away. I think the interesting thing about body image, and something that, you know, parents and children and their teachers need to understand, is that one of the strong driving factors is self-esteem. Body image is part of the child's self-concept. So if they're feeling poorly about themselves and they can't achieve the perfect body, they're just going to feel worse about themselves. So I think good advice for parents is to help build the child's self-esteem away from just physical appearance, but looking at how they do at school, how they do in their friendships, how they do in their hobbies and their skills and their interests in life. There's more to life than just a physical body.
Just as Twiggy was underweight, so too are many of the models we see featured and glamorised in magazines.
Advertisers for both men's and women's magazines use the body beautiful to promote their products. Listen to what happened when editor Cindy Tebble used a large-size model on her cover.
The biggest impact it had on me was when I had been editor of New Woman for a couple of months, and we decided that we would continue a campaign that we'd been doing about body image that had been very popular with the readers, looking at why we seemed to see so many thin models everywhere when certainly everyone in the office, the people that we knew around us, didn't necessarily conform to that media image. So we thought, let's do an issue on body image, which we based around some information that had been done in a 30-year survey by Psychology Today magazine on body image, showing that people felt worse about themselves after 30 years of dieting, spending money on weight loss products, going to the gym, you name it, than they had before they were, made to feel that they had to do this. And we thought, okay, let's put a size 16 or a bigger model on the cover. And we used a woman called Emmy, who's a plus size supermodel in the States, and we shot her in New York and put her on the cover, and we called it The Big Issue. And it went out, and we were inundated with letters from readers who were surprised, grateful, thankful, more letters than I'd ever seen come into the magazine since I'd been working there, and I'd been there at that stage for about 8 years. But one of our major advertisers, a cosmetic advertiser, pulled their business from the magazine for a period because they didn't feel that that type of topic, a discussion about body image, was something that they thought their advertisements would look good next to. So, and advertisers like an environment that suits their products. After that issue came out, I was encouraged by the management of the magazine to stop promoting what they told me were unhealthy ideas. So for me to say to the readers, maybe stop dieting so much, don't consider plastic surgery unless you've really looked into it, all that kind of notion that we should maybe think about other things, to them was unhealthy. I was basically, if you say to people, stop obsessing about your body, they think it means just let everything go to, rack and ruin. And I couldn't continue with that kind of line. I wanted to keep promoting the body image because it got such a great response from the readers. So I parted company with the magazine rather than continue on with articles about plastic surgery and how wonderful it is. Yeah, and I guess my message to people of all ages is to become more aware of this kind of how the media operates, really, why it's there. It's there for as a vehicle or an environment for ads. The ads are there to keep us consuming products, and nothing, they're promising us the world, in a sneaker or a face cream, and really until they become a bit more attuned to how we really feel and what we really need in the society, a new sneaker and a new face cream isn't really going to help any of us achieve success in our lives or happiness or fulfillment. And in a world where people are becoming increasingly concerned about the morality of the corporate world, I think the advertising industry and the media industry have got a lot of questions to answer from the public, and I think the public should start asking them.
Studies have shown that one of the most common behaviours that leads to an eating disorder is actually dieting. Over 90% of women in this country have at some point in their life been on a diet. Fad diets promise remarkable results and fast weight loss. The problem with fast weight loss, though, is once you start eating normally again, the weight just comes straight back on and sometimes brings with it some extra kilos. The key to losing weight and keeping it off is slow, steady weight loss. Dietitian Jenny Pearce explains.
Jenny, with so much emphasis placed on body image, dieting has become a multi-million-dollar industry. How do we know which diet regime to follow?
Well, unfortunately, one of the problems is there is just so many diets and people don't know which one to follow, so they probably might try a whole remit of them, or they probably just pick one or two and stay on them. And when they fail, they feel like they're a failure themselves, and so they just give up trying to make a health change. There are a number of fad diets around, and they're usually based on magic or a little bit of misinformation, or they focus on one food, or they do all these bizarre things that encourage people that there's something special about them. And the problem is people can't stay on them. To give an example of some of them, one would be like the one food diet, for example, where it's like the bread diet or a grapefruit diet, where you just eat one food all day, every day, and you soon get very bored and very sick of that, so people can't maintain it. Another example would be the high protein diets, where you eat a large amount of protein. Now that makes you feel full, so you tend to eat less, so that results in some weight loss. But again, you can't maintain that long term. One that we're quite concerned about is the high fat diets, because they can actually increase your risk of heart disease because of the amount of saturated fat that's consumed. Another one would be some of these high fibre diets, which actually leave people feeling bloated and very uncomfortable, right? And a few side effects like a bit of gas and things. But again, people don't stick to those because long term they just can't maintain them. And I think people are looking for something magical or special in terms of weight loss, and not really realising that it's really hard work to actually make weight loss long term and to make the changes permanently. So some of the things we'd like people to do is to actually make some small changes, get a little bit of exercise, and look at their portion sizes. Another area is to be aware of the energy-dense foods. Now, these are foods that have a high sugar or a high fat content and provide very little in terms of nutrition. And the key issue here is that it's really easy to overeat on these foods, so you tend to eat a lot of them, get a lot more calories for very little nutritional value. So we want people to read labels very carefully. A big concern is the fad dieting creates this yo-yo syndrome, and that's where people lose weight and they gain weight back again. And each time they lose weight, they will also lose a little bit of muscle mass. But unfortunately, when they regain the weight, they regain back predominantly fat. So they actually end up heavier in terms of body fat than what they were when they started. And that's incredibly destructive for people. So the key to actually wanting to maintain and lose weight is to take it slow and steady. And sadly, that's not a message that we find very easy to sell to people.
Fad dieting is not the way to control weight. What we need is a pattern of eating and exercise we can keep for life. The emphasis of diets is on reducing food intake, but another way that we can balance energy is by increasing the amount we burn up. With increasing numbers of people in Western society becoming overweight and obese, we're facing health problems never seen before. Here's health and lifestyle expert Gary Egger.
Obesity is probably the fourth biggest cause of concern in the world over the next 100 years. And WHO has put it down as number 4 after cancer, heart disease and AIDS. It leads on to about 30 different types of diseases, and therefore it's just the start of a whole cascade of epidemics that we're likely to see. For example, the metabolic syndrome leads on to diabetes, which is an epidemic in itself, but that then leads on to an epidemic of eye problems and nephritis, kidney problems and so on. We've also got the other extreme. We've got fatty liver, which comes from obesity, which then leads on to an epidemic of cirrhosis. So we've got this cascade of epidemics that starts at the top with obesity, which in turn starts with poor nutrition and inactivity. It's a major issue, and I think over the next decade at least, we're going to see major interventions to have to deal with this. Another key issue with obesity that needs to be considered is not so much just the metabolic health problems, and we know that there are metabolic health problems. Diabetes is the main one, but that leads on to heart disease and leads to other metabolic problems. But it's the mechanical problems that are an issue. Bad knees, bad hips, bad ankles, which then leads to what I call the M&M syndrome, which is the metabolic syndrome, the mechanical problems, and then the decreases in motivation that follow from that. Because if you've got sore hips or sore ankles or sore knees, or you're incontinent, which is the case with a lot of big women, then you're not going to go out and exercise, and it's exercise and physical activity is the thing that's going to help lose the weight. So in not being able to do that, you're again in a vicious cycle of putting weight on continuously. The problem with interventions for obesity is nobody really knows how to do it. This is unique in world history. This is the biggest epidemic, biggest behavioural epidemic that the world has ever faced. And there's no roadmap, there's no guidelines for it. It's all try and see. At the moment, the major treatments have been clinical. They've been one-on-one. That is, a nutritionist, a doctor, an exercise person with a patient. And whilst that helps those people at high risk, it doesn't help the population as a whole. And there's no way that we can deal with the 67% of men and 55% of women in Australia and New Zealand, at least, who are overweight or obese. So we have to look to population ways of dealing with it. And that means by getting a lot of people to lose a small amount of weight rather than getting a few people to lose a lot of weight. And really, the good news is that they only have to lose 5 to 10% of their body weight. And in some cases, they don't have to lose anything, provided they keep active to therefore get the health benefits of it. I think diet is a four-letter word. I think it stands for a depressing, inexcusable expenditure of time, because basically that's what it is. If you go on a diet, you come off a diet at some stage. And if that's the case, then it's not going to work. Anything that works for long-term weight loss has to be a lifestyle change. And in saying that, it has to also be enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable, you can't do it for the rest of your life, and therefore it's not going to work. So it has to be a lifestyle change that doesn't involve hunger. Hunger is a very, very powerful drive, and people can't maintain hunger for the rest of their lives. They have to be able to eat enough food to satisfy hunger. Now, it might be a different type of food, and they may lose weight through eating that different type of food, but it's certainly not getting hungry, and it's certainly not eating enough food. I think the underestimated aspect of physical activity, if you think of it, there's two sides to it. There's energy in and there's energy out. Now, there's a lot of things that influence energy in and a lot of things that influence energy out. It's the type of food we eat and the type of physical activity we do, plus metabolic rate, plus whether you work in a job that's vigorous or not. All of these things will influence that. But basically, it's energy in and energy out. We've concentrated over the last 20 or 30 years on the energy inside of it. And traditionally, this area has been owned by nutritionists. Now we're only just starting to see that the other side of it is probably more important over the long term, not over the short term. Anybody can reduce 1,000 calories in the diet best by taking it out of food. It's very difficult to increase 1,000 calories by exercise, because it means walking about 15 kilometres more per day, and that's something difficult to do, particularly for a big person. So you can take 1,000 calories a day out of food, of somebody that's eating 4,000 calories a day, let's say, and that happens quite quickly. But over the long term, taking that 1,000 calories a day isn't going to work, because they're not going to be able to maintain that for the rest of their life, whereas the physical activity is the thing that's going to help them maintain the weight loss once they've done it. So whilst the two components are equally important, they vary in the timescale. Diet more important than or not diet, but reduction in the type of foods that are eaten in the short term, and then physical activity more in the longer term for keeping weight off.
So even if you are overweight and take up some exercise, you'll receive significant benefits. You don't have to be slim in order to get health benefits from some lifestyle changes. As little as a 5 or 10% drop in weight can improve your health.
Ever been on a binge when you're feeling pressured or under stress? Like, it means that you're eating because you've had some sort of emotional reaction instead of because you're hungry. You might have feelings of anxiety, you might be lonely, depressed, feeling like you don't have any control over your life, or maybe you're just bored. Well, while comfort eating will hit the spot in the short term, in the long term the underlying problem will still be there until you acknowledge it and deal with it. Deanne Jade spoke to Jonathan Duffy about when emotional eating becomes a problem.
Deanne, how do our emotions interrelate with our eating?
Well, some people call emotional eating comfort eating, and basically it's the kind of eating that you would do that changes your state of mind rather than satisfies your physical hunger. And by that I mean it's the kind of eating you do which makes you feel better or comforts you or consoles you because you're feeling bad or miserable.
Is stress the most common trigger for people eating?
I think it's more a matter of emotional discomfort. Some people have great difficulty with key emotions like anger, guilt, anxiety or worry, depression, loneliness, and actually just feeling bad about themselves in general. And they don't like this emotional discomfort. And when they feel this discomfort, rather than deal with the emotion head on, they eat it away because either they haven't got permission to feel these feelings or because it's really difficult for them to cope with these feelings.
Deanne, how do we combat comfort eating?
Well, there are many things that can be done, and I need to point out that combating comfort or emotional eating is not about doing lengthy psychotherapy. It's all about building what we call emotional resilience. And the first thing really is to be well-nourished. If you're well-nourished, your brain is less irritated and you're much more likely to be able to deal with your feelings rather than eat them away. The second thing is develop a wide emotional vocabulary. That means naming your feelings, actually identifying what they are, not just be feeling low or feeling okay, but name what you're really feeling. And in this way, you're less likely to be in discomfort with your emotions and more likely to be able to handle them appropriately rather than just eat them away. Then I would suggest legitimizing those feelings, because all of the feelings that people are scared of are felt by people, whether they're overeaters or not. So just having permission to feel these feelings is very important, and you're less likely to be scared of them and want to suppress them under mounds of chocolate or ice cream. I reckon the next thing, once you've named and legitimized your emotions, is to learn some very good skills for dealing with them. And one way you can do this is by books. There are lots of self-help books there about managing anger, managing anxiety, guilt, loneliness. Solve the problems that are generating these emotions, rather than just being scared of the emotions and eating them away. And part of managing emotions is, I think, about developing good communication skills, learning how to express the things you want. Most people think they want food or want cake. They don't know what they really want, and they don't know how to ask to get their wants met or to get those needs satisfied. In order to be able to do all that, I think it's important also to learn how to relax. And yoga, meditation, playing a relaxation tape, or even going out and doing some exercise is a great way of learning how to relax. And it also occupies eating time to a certain extent. So it's a good way of dealing with emotional eating. I think wrapping all that up, we could say that dealing with emotional eating is about building emotional resilience. Doing that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, and a certain amount of emotional eating is normal anyway. Eating does make us feel good and feel better, so a little bit of that does no harm. And once you've got all those skills in place, then emotional eating will have what I might call its normal place in your life, rather than being the only way you can have a relationship with food.
When you think about it, our bodies are a lot like this mandarin. On the outside, it's all pitted and wrinkly and not so perfect. But on the inside, ta-da, juicy, yummy fruit, full of flavour.
So, don't judge someone by their outer shell.
Exactly my point. You've got to accept yourself, shell and all.
Accepting ourselves for what we are. It's easy enough to say.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do it? Well, Jane Ogden has some ideas.
Fruit.
Yes.
Jane, none of us have the perfect body. So how do we go about accepting the body that we've got?
I think there's many kind of glib ways of going about trying to encourage someone to accept the way that they look. And there's a whole literature out there which says, you know, be happy with the way that you look, accept the way that you look, kind of, you know, rejoice in the fact that you are different. But I think for those people out there who still feel that they are overweight, they're a different size than they would like to be, or they're too skinny or too fat or whatever, then that doesn't really is not really much help to them to just think, I've got to be happy about it. So I suppose there's some ways that maybe you can try and enhance that. One is to try and encourage yourself not to take this piecemeal account of your own body, and rather than sort of looking at individual components and saying, this is my legs, my arms, my thighs, my bottom, my stomach, actually try and get the overall view and the overall picture. And I think the more you do that, then the more you can let some bits of your body compensate for other bits of your body and perhaps feel more positive about it. Another way to do it is to realise that probably you are your own worst critic, and that if you reflect on how you look at other people, mostly we're quite tolerant of other people's bodies, and we look at other people and we let them get away with a bit of fat, or being too short, or being too skinny, or having, you know, bodies that aren't ideal, and we're actually quite tolerant and quite happy with them not being perfect. But then when we look at ourselves, it's us that are the people who are the most critical of our own bodies. And maybe if we realise that other people aren't as critical as us, then we can try and learn to not be as critical of the way that we look ourselves. I think another important way is to develop a healthy scepticism about the media and the film industry. And when you're being bombarded with images in magazines or on the television, first of all, to not look at them and think, I wish I were like that, but to look at them and think, well, you know, are they happy? Do they really look like that? Is that a matter of lighting? Is that a matter of clothing? You know, how much have they had to starve themselves to look like that? And would you really want to aspire to be in that person's body? And I think the final, probably most important thing is to try and unpack what it is that you think would happen to you if you had this perfect body. And rather than people thinking, I would just have the perfect body, people also load on a whole load of other kind of expectations from this new world that they would have if they were thinner, or if they were better built, or if they had a better body. And they think, I would have a better body, and I would be happier, and I'd have better relationships, and I'd be more successful, and I'd feel more in control of my life. And all these other expectations are in there, rather than just thinking, actually, I just have a different body size. And if you try and unpack that, then maybe what you can do is you can take those expectations and try and get them in a more direct way. So if you want better relationships, you want to feel more in control of your life, or have a more successful job, then go about doing those things directly, rather than thinking they would simply be a consequence of changing your body size. And I think that's why body size is so important for people, because people think, if I could change my body size, then all these other aspects of my life would change automatically. Whereas in fact they wouldn't. You could spend the rest of your life dieting, or having plastic surgery, or doing loads and loads of exercise, and at the end of the day your body size might be different, but your relationships, your job, yourself, your happiness would all be exactly the same. They wouldn't have changed. So what you should do is try and change those things directly.
Certainly being a particular body shape won't guarantee happiness or even healthiness.
Instead of focusing so much on what we look like, shift a gear. Focus more on exercise and eating better.
And accepting ourselves for who we are and celebrating the difference.
Remember, we're our own worst critics. If we can accept others the way they are, then surely we can accept ourselves.
And let's take the guilt out of eating and focus instead on good nutrition, daily exercise, relaxation and rest.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye for now.
Thank you.